Welcome back to Verbal Sparring and welcome to the State of the UFC. If you are new to the channel, this is a monthly series where we take a look back at the previous month's action for the Ultimate Fighting Championship and break it all down on a card-by-card basis, and we dig into the stats, how many knockouts, how many submissions, how many decisions, how many fights happened in each division, and how were the rankings directly impacted in the aftermath of each fight card. The month of November featured 4 fight cards, and we will start with UFC Vegas 110 and run all the way through UFC Qatar. So let's head to Las Vegas, Nevada at the home of the UFC in the Apex. UFC Vegas 110 featured 13 fights in total with 2 knockouts, 6 submissions, and 5 decisions. Both knockouts occurred in the very first round, and of the 6 submissions, it was evenly split across the first, second, and third with 2 subs in each round. And of the 5 decisions, there were 4 unanimously agreed upon by the judges and 1 split. We would see 3 fights in the welterweight division, 2 fights in the featherweight and strawweight divisions, and 1 fight each at heavyweight, light heavyweight, middleweight, bantamweight, flyweight, and women's bantamweight. As far as how the rankings were impacted in the aftermath of this UFC Vegas 110 fight card, we saw the number 12 ranked Steve Garcia secure a first round knockout over the then 13th ranked David Onama, which was Garcia's 7th consecutive victory and 6th by way of knockout over the course of that streak. And as a result, Garcia would rise not only into the top 10, but all the way up to the number 8 spot in the world, and David Onama would fall 1 spot from 13 to 14. And with the 4 spot jump from Garcia, that forced Brian Ortega, Josh Emmett, Jean Silva, and Patricio Pitbull all down 1 spot, and Dan Ige would switch places with Onama and move from 14 to 13. And in the women's bantamweight division, we would see Norma Dumont pick up her 6th consecutive victory, and none bigger than this split decision over Ketlin Vieira. Vieira was ranked number 3 heading into this bout, with Norma Dumont 1 spot behind her at number 4, and in the aftermath, they would simply just switch places, and now Norma Dumont finds herself at number 3 in the world and on the cusp of a bantamweight title shot. Next, we move to UFC Vegas 111, however, we stay in the same venue, and that was the Apex in Las Vegas, and this time, the welterweight Grand Prix would be kicked off as we would see Gabriel Bonfim take on Randy Brown in the main event. This fight card would feature 12 fights with 5 knockouts, 3 submissions, and 4 decisions, with all 4 of those decisions being unanimous. There were 2 knockouts in round 1 and 3 in round 2, and there was 1 submission in round 1 and 2 in the second. The middleweight, welterweight, and bantamweight divisions would all have 2 fights apiece on this night, while heavyweight, lightweight, featherweight, flyweight, women's bantamweight, and strawweight would all have 1 fight apiece. And for an Apex fight card, there was quite a bit of movement throughout the rankings, and we start in that main event as Gabriel Bonfim would pick up his 6th victory inside of the UFC octagon, and he did it with a 2nd round knockout over Randy Brown. Much like Steve Garcia in the previous week's main event jumping up 4 spots, Gabriel Bonfim would rise up 4 spots in the welterweight division from 14 to 10 after this victory. And with the 4 spot increase from Bonfim in the rankings, he would send 4 people down 1 spot each, and that was Colby Covington, Gilbert Burns, Jeff Neal, and Daniel Rodriguez. Joseph Morales improved to 2-0 in his 2nd stint in the UFC with a first-round submission over Matt Schnell, and as a result, he would crack into the top 15, capping it out at that 15th and final spot. Jacqueline Cavalcanti, one of the most underrated female fighters on the entire roster in my opinion, picked up another victory, remaining undefeated in the UFC, and this time it was a decision win over the former title challenger Mayra Bueno Silva. These two had just swapped places, so now Cavalcanti finds herself at number 10, and Bueno Silva finds herself at number 11. And lastly, in the strawweight division, we saw Denise Gomes pick up arguably the biggest win of her career by earning a decision win over the longtime veteran Tisha Pennington. Much like the fight previously mentioned, these two would also just swap places, so now Denise Gomes finds herself at number 13, and Tisha Pennington finds herself at 15. Next, we move to the pay-per-view for November, and that was UFC 322, arguably the most stacked fight card of the entire year in the world's most famous arena, Madison Square Garden, New York City, New York, and we saw 2 super fights on the very same card. In total, we would see 14 bouts with 5 knockouts, 2 submissions, and 7 decisions, and much like the previous week, this card also had all of the decisions be settled unanimously by the judges. Of the 5 knockouts, there were 2 in the first round, 1 in the second, and 2 in the third, and for the submissions, there was 1 in round 1 and 1 in round 2. We saw 4 fights in the middleweight division, 3 fights in the welterweight division, 2 fights each at lightweight, featherweight, and women's flyweight, and 1 fight at strawweight. The main event featured Islam Makhachev moving up to 170 pounds to challenge Jack Della Maddalena in an attempt to become a 2-weight world champion, and in the aftermath, that is exactly what he did. And with this move to 170 for Islam, this had drastic implications for not only his new weight class at 170, but his former weight class at 155. The entire lightweight division would rise up 1 spot, but there are a couple of exceptions, because on this very same card, Benoit Saint Denis would defeat Beneil Dariush via first round knockout in just 16 seconds. So rather than moving up just 1 spot because Islam was removed from the lightweight rankings, he would rise up 5 spots from number 13 all the way to number 8, and Beneil Dariush would drop 3 spots from 9 to 12. And with the entire lightweight division shifting upward because of Islam Makhachev being removed, that means that the entire welterweight division would have to shift down because he was added in. But again, much like the lightweight division, there were a couple of exceptions because on this very same card, there were massive welterweight clashes for the title picture. Michael Morales would knock out Sean Brady in the first round and move from number 8 to number 3, forcing Sean Brady to bump down from 2 to 7, and Carlos Prates would rise up from 9 to 5 after being the first man to ever knock out the former champion Leon Rocky Edwards, sending him down 5 spots from 4 to 9. And due to the large movements of those 4 men, we would see Kamaru Usman drop 3 spots from 5 to 8, Joaquin Buckley drop 3 spots from 7 to 10, and Colby Covington drop 2 spots from 11 to 13. And in the strawweight division, we saw Fatima Klein improve to 3-0 in the 115-pound division, all of those victories coming in 2025, and she did so with a very impressive decision over the longtime battle-tested vet Angela Hill. Fatima Klein, after her 3rd strawweight bout, would find herself not only entering the top 15 after this victory, but now sitting at number 12, forcing the formerly ranked 12th Angela Hill down 2 spots to number 14, which would then force the 14th ranked Alexia Tainara down to 15. And finally, we head to UFC Qatar, the UFC's first trip ever to this country, in the city of Doha at the ABHA Arena, headlined by Arman Tsarukyan and Dan Hooker in what now more than ever seems like a number 1 contendership spot. This card also featured 14 fights with 5 knockouts, 4 submissions, and 5 decisions. There were 4 first-round knockouts and 1 in the second, and then we would see 1 first-round submission, 1 second-round submission, and 2 in the third. And of the 5 decisions, there were 4 unanimous and 1 split. This fight card featured 3 bouts in the 170-pound division, and then 2 fights at heavyweight, light heavyweight, lightweight, and flyweight, and 1 fight each at middleweight, featherweight, and bantamweight. Capping out the welterweight Grand Prix for the month of November was Ian Machado Gary versus Bilal Muhammad in the co-main event, as we would see Machado Gary pick up the biggest win of his career, a unanimous decision over the former champion Muhammad. He would rise from number 6 to number 2, and Bilal would fall from 2 to 5, and then some of those names that we just mentioned from UFC 322, they got some shuffling after this result. Shavkat Rakhmonov would rise from 4 to 3, Michael Morales would drop from 3 to 4, and Carlos Prates would be forced down from 5 to 6. Volkan Oezdemir secured his 3rd victory out of his last 4 fights with a first-round knockout over Alonzo Minifield, and while he didn't move and he held his spot at number 9, we would see the 14th ranked Minifield drop to number 15, switching places with Zhang Mingyang. On just 48 hours notice, Waldo Cortez Acosta would fly across the world to Qatar and come in and knock out the 11th ranked Shamil Gaziev in the very first round. And he would be awarded with a top 5 spot in the heavyweight division, moving up 1 spot, forcing Jailton Almeida down to number 6. And then we saw some pretty significant movement to the back half of the flyweight division. Firstly, we must talk about Kyoji Horiguchi re-debuting into the UFC after nearly a decade away in Bellator and Rizin. And not only would he defeat the 11th ranked Tagir Ulanbekov, but he would submit him in the 3rd round. This would allow Kyoji Horiguchi not to just enter the top 15, but he would break into the top 10, now sitting at number 8 in the world. He would force the 11th ranked Tagir Ulanbekov down 1 spot to number 12, which would then bump Charles Johnson and Bruno Silva both down 1 spot respectively, and Lonir Kavanaugh would debut in the top 15 at the 15th spot. And secondly, in the flyweight division was Asu Almabayev getting a submission win, also in round number 3, and it was against the number 7 ranked former title challenger Alex Perez. Asu would just take that number 7 spot, rising up 1 spot from number 8, but Perez would actually drop 4 spots down to number 11. So we talked about how the rankings were directly impacted after each individual fight card, but now let's take a grand scheme of things look at how the pound for pound rankings sit for both the men and women as we head into the final month of the year. After Islam Makhachev became a two-weight world champion by dethroning Jack Della Maddalena, he recaptured the number one pound for pound spot in the world, taking it from his rival, even though they likely won't fight each other, Ilia Topuria. Merab Dvalishvili has a fight coming up on December 6th against Petr Yan, and he currently sits at number 3 pound for pound. Someone else also competing on that card and defending their belt, much like Merab, is the 5th ranked pound for pound fighter Alexandre Pantoja, the current flyweight king. Jack Della Maddalena, after losing to Islam Makhachev, now sits at number 11 pound for pound, dropping 2 spots from number 9. Arman Tsarukyan actually climbed 1 spot after his UFC Qatar victory over Dan Hooker. He now sits at number 13, and capping out the pound for pound ranks is Bilal Muhammad, the former welterweight champion. As for the women, it is still the queen, Valentina Shevchenko, the women's flyweight champion, and she held on to that number 1 spot by defeating Zhang Weili, who was number 2 at that point, but now sits at number 3. Erin Blanchfield got a victory at UFC 322. It was actually a second round submission over Tracy Cortez. She sits right in the middle at number 7, and capping out the top 15 of the women's pound for pound ranks is the aforementioned Norma Dumont after her 6th consecutive victory at the beginning of the month. So now let's add up all of those stats that we talked about from those 4 cards in November and bring it all to a total. We would see 53 fights with 17 knockouts, 15 submissions, and 21 decisions, meaning that our finishing rate for the month was 60.3%, the second highest of the year. There were 10 knockouts in round 1, 5 in round 2, and 2 in round 3. Then we saw 5 submissions in the opening round, with 6 in round 2 and 4 in round 3. And of the 21 decisions, 19 of them were unanimous and just 2 via split. As you may have expected, the division that saw the most amount of action in the month of November was the welterweight division with 11. The second most came at middleweight with 8, followed by the featherweight division with 6. The lightweight division would have 5 fights. Then we saw 4 divisions with 4 fights. That was heavyweight, bantamweight, flyweight, and strawweight. The light heavyweight division featured 3 fights. And we had 2 divisions tied for the least amount of action in the month of November, and that was the women's bantamweight and women's flyweight divisions, both of them featuring just 2 bouts. And now I want to give some shine to the UFC newcomers that got victories in their debut bouts, and we had at least one fighter on all 4 cards in November. At UFC Vegas 110, it was Dante Johnson defeating Cedriques Dumas with a second round submission in the middleweight division, and I believe he still has a 100% finish rate intact after that victory. At UFC Vegas 111, we saw the heavyweight newcomer Josh Hokett knock out Max Jimenez in the very first round, and actually in the opening minute, 56 seconds to be exact. He is definitely someone to look out for in the big boy weight class heading into the new year. At UFC 322, we saw Ethan Ewing debut on about 2 days' notice, come in as a big-time underdog and defeat Malcolm Wellmaker via unanimous decision, and dare I say, a pretty convincing decision as well. And at UFC Qatar, the UFC's first ever event in the country, we saw 3 UFC newcomers pick up victories. Training partner of Paddy Pimblett, Luke Riley, picked up a second round knockout over Bogdan Grad. He's a featherweight. Abdul Rahman Yakiayev picked up a first round submission in just 33 seconds over Rafael Sakara. He is a very dangerous prospect to look out for at light heavyweight. And in the heavyweight division, we saw Denzel Freeman defeat Marek Bujilo via unanimous decision. And now we are left with just 1 month in the UFC and the 2025 calendar, which means there are 2 events remaining. The first is UFC 323 on December 6th in Las Vegas with 2 championship bouts, Merab Dvalishvili versus Petr Yan in a rematch, and the flyweight king Alexandre Pantoja taking on the number 1 ranked Joshua Van. And the final event of the year will be in none other than the Apex in Las Vegas, UFC Vegas 112. It will feature the number 3 ranked flyweight Brandon Royval taking on the 6th ranked Manel Kopp in a massive flyweight bout just 1 week after the title in their division is being defended. So that is it for the November edition of The State of the UFC. And if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new, because every single month I bring this series to the channel alongside weekly breakdowns and recaps of all of the biggest and best fights and fight cards, and I give my thoughts and opinions on MMA news and fight announcements. And we are also on on the road to reaching 1,000 subscribers, so any and all support would be greatly appreciated, as it would be absolutely insane to hit that milestone before the end of the year. And you can also join the community on social media at Verbal Spar MMA on X, Instagram, and TikTok, as well as like the Facebook page Verbal Sparring MMA, and you can follow along on your favorite audio listening platforms such as Spotify and Apple, where every Monday and Friday podcast episodes release there. Have a great week, and I will see you all in the next video.